Good evening, folks. It's nice to see a crowd out on a rainy night. I'm Terry Taylor. I'm one of the board members for the Friends of the North Carolina Room, and I'm going to introduce Ben in a bit. But first, I want to encourage you that if you're not a member of the Friends of the North Carolina Room, to please pick up an application, not an application, but just you say you'll pay some money and support us. It's only $15 a year, and it helps us, buy things for the collection. It also helps us to present some of these programs that we've been doing over the last year. Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce Ben Porter. Ben's a fifth-generation Porter from Asheville and the mountains of western North Carolina. That's a pretty big, deep one. Ben, I think I may have you beat by a couple of generations, but that's beside the point. Ben's photographs are in the collections of the George Eastman House, the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, the Library of Congress, the Asheville Art Museum, and in the UNC Library's collection at Chapel Hill. Ben has rephotographed many of Pelton's images. In '94, there was an exhibit at the Asheville Art Museum. Ben's got a copy of the catalog from that show that's back there. I, for some reason, didn't have one, so I bought one. And they're really inexpensive. And Ben and I were just talking, and we've decided that they're antiques now. So buy them while you can. I'm not going to ramble on. I'm just going to go ahead and is Ben still in the room somewhere?
Yeah.
Oh, thank God. That's not pretty bad. Ben Porter.
Good evening. Antique catalogs. And they have some interesting essays from Mitzi Tessier, and has the work of George Massa, along with Herbert Pelton, and then Gil Liebrick, and my re-photographs from that project. Before I get started, I'd like to thank the library for having me here tonight, particularly Zoe, Anne, Catherine, Terry, and Ione Whitlock, who's done some scanning, and Susan Egerton, not at the library, has done a lot of scanning for me, and people who've helped me find these images over time. I can think of Scott Fowler, Eric Baden, Diane Sanderson at Warren Wilson College, and then occasionally people who've helped me do these photographs, like Mark Tatarka has been involved in a number of the panoramas, so thank you all. But the biggest thank you is to Meow, my wife, who has put up with whatever this madness is, and thank you, Meow. So to show Herbert Pelton's photographs, I have to show some of my photographs as well, and how he influenced me as a photographer. My background is in documentary work, 35mm camera. But along about 1985, I was in this wonderful program here in North Carolina called the Visiting Artist Program. Unfortunately, it's now defunct, but every community college could have an artist in residence there. And we would do exchanges where I would have an artist. I was at, the last place was McDowell Tech down in Marion. Or you go visit, and I went out to the coast and I was visiting Kathy Kroll, a photographer down there, doing the program. And in her house at night, I was going to sleep, I was looking at this big picture book called North Carolina Illustrated by H.G. Jones. And in that book, I saw the first Herbert Pelton panorama. I remember it, it's Champion Fiber. And I was struck by it. I'd been dabbling in panoramas myself a little bit, but I noticed that he'd worked up in the mountains and lived here, and I wanted to find out more about him. So I wrote Mr. Jones, and I asked him what he could tell me about Herbert Pelton. And he said he knew very little, gave me a couple dates, but he said with assiduous research, you can put flesh on the bones of his body. And I think that's what I've done.
Can we turn down the lights?
Here go the lights. And this is informal. If you have questions, it's okay to stop me as I go. But this is Mr. Pelton right here in one of his panoramas. I didn't know it at the time, but I just thought it was because of how he was posed. He's there like he just ran in a panorama, the whole camera rotates, and he would have had to run to this side of the group. And sure enough, that is him. He was born in 1879, and so in this December he will be 140 years old, or he would have been. He's one of 6 children. His father was a Presbyterian minister, and at the age of 8 they moved from Illinois to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he was employed as a draftsman at the local telephone company.
Benjamin, the first photograph you showed, when was that taken? Do you know what the subject was?
Yes, that's the Asheville Board of Trade, the very first one. We'll come back to it. I'll have a complete one. I just had to give you a little picture of Herbert to start with. Actually, I feel like this is Herbert's coming out party because he has not gotten due credit, I feel, and that was kind of a mission of mine over the years to give credit to Herbert Pelton because he's an excellent photographer, commercial photographer, but particularly with his panoramas. This was the image I saw in the book, which kind of flipped me around. It's taken a champion fiber, and in 1910, I believe, it was a couple years after it opened. So he was employed as a draftsman, and I think being employed as a draftsman might indicate why his titling is so precise and exact. You'll hopefully see that in some of these panoramas. Quite detailed, quite neat. And then he moved to North Carolina following his sweetheart, Sarah Edmonds, and they were married at All Souls Episcopal Church in 1906. She was 34 and he was 27. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the sites, if I know about the site. Sunburst, North Carolina was a small little logging village. And it was kind of booming with the effort of supplying wood during World War I and supplying wood to Champion. It was destroyed completely by fire in 1925, and then it was flooded in 1932 when they created Lake Logan, which is now owned by the Episcopal Church. This is a picture up outside of Waynesville of what's called Cloudland, a hotel that's no longer there. Eagle's Nest is the area, and there was a hotel, and it was a very popular place to go. Up about 5,000 feet, there was a dirt road that you could drive up to it, or a horse and buggy. I think a lot of people might, if you know Pelton's work, you might think of him as doing groups of people, but he has some wonderful landscapes from the region. And that's the hotel there on the left. And he was good at photographing events. This is when William James Bryant was in town. I like the title, it says, and some of his friends. It feels like all of his best friends, or some of his best friends. Bryant visited as early as 1896 during his first campaign. He ran for the presidency 3 times. And in 1896, he delivered a stirring speech at the Riverside Park to what was reported to be the largest crowd ever to hear a speaker in western North Carolina. In December of 1912, he again came to Asheville, where he addressed an audience of about 2,000 people in the city auditorium. Prior to his speech, Bryant toured the city by automobile. This is from the local newspaper, I forgot to quote this, and posed with a group of local luminaries atop Sunset Mountain, at the base of which he was to construct his house 5 years later. In July 1913, Bryant was the guest of honor and principal speaker at the gala opening of the Grove Park Inn, etc., etc. So he did live here for a few years. This is one of my favorites, is cast of the Pirates of Penzance in 1917. Can y'all see okay? Is the lighting okay? Okay, good. From the newspaper, it said it was a brilliant success from every point of view. Practically no trace of amateur effort in the work of the principals. Something I love about Pelton is he was very good at posing people. So if you look at the front row, the ladies, how they're lying on top of each other, very posed, very casually. Very good, and he got people's attention. Rarely do you see people looking somewhere else when he's doing a panorama. I think, oh, you can't see.
Ben?
Yes.
How long would they have had to sit there for that panorama?
The actual exposure, this is a panoramic camera here, a circuit camera like what he used. It rotates, and depending on the lighting of the day, it could have taken 10 to 15 to 20 seconds for the exposure. And it sweeps from one side of the group to the other side of the group. Yeah. This is a great image. This is just part of the panorama. It was at Warren Wilson College, and I hadn't seen it in 20 years, and I went to look for it, and it was not there. But thanks to Diane Sanderson, who runs our archive, she was able to find it. But the Normal and Collegiate Institute was founded in 1892, and it taught young girls domestic skills. By 1918, 570 women had graduated. The motto of the school was service. And service meant, in the school, it meant working with people of Western North Carolina and the Appalachian region to stimulate them to higher ideals through faith. It was one of many women's schools that flourished in Western North Carolina. In 1903, Bulletin stated, "The pupil is taught to draft, cut, and fit garments, and to prepare food in the most economical and appetizing manner." And the Bible was a textbook in every department. Changed its name to Asheville Normal School in 1931, and then ended up closing in 1944. The property buildings were sold for a hospital and later torn down to make way for Memorial Mission Hospital. And the farm schools want to know it became Warren Wilson College. And this is another school that is no longer, the Black Mountain College, so I thought I would put that, this is my image following that, and I think this group probably all knows about Black Mountain College, an incredible institution, and cutting-edge artists at that time. And it opened in 1933 and closed in 1957. When the graduates, I think this is the only reunion the school has had. And when the lady, right after I did the shot, one of the ladies came out and said, "Thank you for including Mae West." And I kind of scratched my head because I didn't think Mae West had gone to Black Mountain College. And she said, no, those two mountains and the peaks in the background, on a clear day, they will be reflected in the lake. And that's the shape of Mae West. So inadvertently, she was included. This is one of the more unique panoramas. I happened to see this. In fact, a lot of the panoramas are in private hands. Yes, there's some here in the North Carolina collection and some in the Library of Congress, but I'm always interested in cataloging them if you come across a Herbert Pelton panorama. But this is unusual. I saw this on the wall at the Swananoa Cleaners down on Cox Street. And the owner at the time, it was his mother, Carolyn Brown, who had been at this private party that Pelton had done the panorama for. And subsequently, he's passed away, and his daughter recently, Mrs. Smith, recently sold Swananoa Cleaners, but she was kind enough to loan us this to scan it for the presentation tonight. Then you had a party, yes. And from one older dance group to a more contemporary dance group, when the Bolshoi Ballet came into town in 1998, I'd spent the day trying to get it's not a quick camera to use, so I'd spent the day trying to get a panorama of this group here. And I missed. So finally I went to the airport because I knew they were flying out. And I set up where their aircraft was. And the pilot said, "What do I do?" I said, "Oh, well, I'm hoping to get a panorama of the Bolshoi Ballet, but it's been really hard." He said, "Don't worry, they can't leave until I take off." So he is obviously very happy. The pilot you see up in the cockpit, he's very happy to be in the panorama, and it was a collaboration. And a lot of times panoramas are collaborations. It's not just me. It takes a group effort.
I love the woman on the left-hand side of the photograph, with her arm up in the air.
Dorothy Austin.
Pardon?
Mrs. Austin, a local,
Oh, is that who that was?
Deborah Austin, yeah. And Whittier also was another small logging town in the mountains. And he probably did these on commission, but not always. The way a panoramic photographer works is that if you're doing a group, you're usually doing it on speculation. You're usually often not paid, but you try to make your money selling prints to the people in the group.
Victor, when you said that he was originally a draftsman, is that his personal writing on each?
I believe it is.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's always very distinctive, but that's my hunch. Yeah. Here is Hendersonville. The reason there's that big crease in the middle, those are prints from the Library of Congress, and I think they originally folded the panoramas or cut them or something to make them fit in the box. So that's why you have that ugly white line. And here's, Bob, here's that image from the Asheville Board of Trade, which was the precursor to the Chamber of Commerce of Asheville. And having a meeting out at Hot Springs, see the banners with Asheville, I think they were quite pumped. And it says Pelton and Higgison. He actually collaborated, had a partnership with Higgison for 3 or 4 years. Herbert and his wife Sarah bought a boarding house called the Reverie, and it was on North Spruce Street, just across from the old Kentucky home run by Julia Wolfe, and just a few doors up from Luther Higgison, the photographer. And I have to think that crossing of paths is what led Pelton to photography, because he had him as a neighbor, and then they worked together. And this is a photograph I did of the first day of issue for the Thomas Wolfe stamp. And I was trying to photograph events that I thought were in the same vein of what Pelton would have done. And Wilma Dykeman's on the far left, or the third one in from the left. Pat Conroy was somewhere. I have him in one of the panoramas, but he must have gone to the bathroom for the shot. And then his relatives are there, descendants are there of Thomas Wolfe. And I noticed as the camera was turning, everyone's looking at me, which is not usually the case. And I said, well, this is kind of amazing. Let's just let the camera keep turning and get everyone. And I gave everyone their 15 seconds of fame. The Langford Hotel was downtown. It had kind of stood as you'll see a photograph where it's just concrete. It's not finished. It was 6 or 7 years before it was finished. And this is like the first weekend right after it opened. And they had this meeting up on top of the Langford Hotel. I like this fellow here, way in the back. Just barely see his head. But he knew where to stand. Something that's unnerving when you're doing a group is to have people blocking each other, so he knew where to stand. So this one, I did not know what the Woodmen of the World were, the group. I associated it, I thought it had to do with forestry products or taking down trees or whatever. And I went to look and no, behold, it is a not-for-profit fraternal benefit society, founded in 1890 in Omaha, Nebraska. They work towards bettering their own lives, their families' lives, and their communities. And it also had a women's auxiliary. And they have, I think, still a big insurance company associated with Life.
Ben,
Yes.
in Riverside Cemetery, you'll see headstones that say Woodmen of the World.
That's right.
Provided headstones.
And there, it's like a stump,
Yeah.
a tree stump, concrete. They did that up until the 1930s or 40s. They ran out of money. It became too expensive. But yeah, they used to provide the headstones for their members who passed away. Yeah. So since I thought it was forestry products, I put my photograph of the Woodsman's Meet, which is a forestry festival day, Cradle Forestry each year. It's where a number of colleges or community colleges compete, sawing down trees, doing whatever you would do to compete in forestry. And so, no, Woodmen of the World had nothing to do with trees. But I like the sign that Penn State's holding over here on the left. It says, "Kiss my axe." And here's the Bingham School, which moved to Asheville in 1891. It had about 120 students, and it went till 1928, which is a year after Robert Bingham died. He was the grandson of the founder. This taken in 1914, I just think how many of those might have gone to World War I and survived. I like his hat's kind of askew there. It's kind of funny. Is there a football team? And they didn't wear many pads back then. I wonder if they wore helmets. They must have worn helmets. Maybe leather helmets, I'm not sure. But their hip pads are like pieces of foam. Yeah. I'd not seen this panorama until walking in a few days ago. It's here upstairs in the showcase. A Laurel Park in Henderson County is a great shot. Not set up at all. The park was a residential and tourist spot, in 1925 they planned to build a hotel, which was supposed to be a 13-story hotel, and it was never finished after reaching the 13th floor. They did have a casino, the Laurel Park Casino, operated at the lake in 1925, and the earliest mention of the park was in 1901 in Asheville Citizen. Does anyone know if that lake still exists? Oh, anyway, I don't know. The Great Flood of 1960. And Pelton's documentary of the flood, I think, is the best. He has a series of panoramas. We'll look at 3 of them, I think. But think about lugging the camera to do this on a day when it would be much easier to take a smaller camera to photograph. But nothing really captured it like the sweeping view with his panoramic camera. This is looking down in the direction of the railroad station. It's hard to see. You'll see it better in another sense. I'm going to read a little piece about the flood by Heidi Williams. It was in our state magazine. The flood of 1916 broke every record in the book. The death and destruction caused in western North Carolina defined flooding for an entire generation of survivors. Decades before hurricanes had names, when weather wasn't forecast so much as it was broadcast, it rained for a solid week over western North Carolina. And then it rained again, harder than it ever rained before. In 1916, weathermen couldn't predict a hurricane's path with much more precision than the Farmer's Almanac could predict the hour of winter's first snowfall. Early meteorologists could, however, measure the speed and strength of falling rain. On Saturday, July 15, 1916, the Blue Ridge region saw more rain than anyone anywhere had ever seen since such records had been kept. One spot near Grandfather Mountain measured more than 22 inches of rain in 24 hours. Pelton's on a railroad car here. He's climbed up on a boxcar to make this image. When the rain began in earnest before dawn on Saturday, there was already nowhere left to go. Nowhere except out of the riverbeds, out of the ground, out of all the neat places nature makes for water, and into places where it had never been before, and in some cases where it would never go again. When the sun rose on Sunday, July 16th, the rain had waned, but the landscape had just begun its transformation. Flooded streets became raging rivers. I like this. Lazy streams burst open into torrents of deep, deadly water. More than 80 people died. Hundreds of homes were destroyed. There were millions of dollars worth of destruction. It was the flood to end all floods, and the clouds were just beginning to part. And this is from West Asheville, looking over back to that Asheville. There's a tannery, which was located right here. And we'll see a panorama of the tannery later. Then we come up to the railroad depot, which is that white structure with a dome. I don't know that they ever built it again there. I'm not sure if they ever did build a railroad depot there. And then we're looking at Chicken Hill. But this one gives a very good idea of the destruction that occurred. So fortunately, I didn't have as great a flood to rephotograph, but this, I've been seeing numerous flooding here over the years. It still happens periodically. I was at where the old 12 Bones was, and they're in their parking lot looking out towards the south and towards the river. And the kayaker just had to be there, my good fortune. McCormick Field. So this photograph made by Pelton was on the first professional game that was played at McCormick Field. There had been one game, I think a college game played prior to this. But what's auspicious about this is that the Detroit Tigers, led by Ty Cobb, were visiting town and played the local Asheville team. And the Asheville team beat them 18-14. Here, here. And Ty Cobb had what was called an All-America All-Field. They had Heine Manouche and Haley Hellman were all in the outfield along with Ty Cobb. And Asheville did well. When Babe Ruth came and played, Babe Ruth played as well when he first saw McCormick Field, and he said, "Wow, what a beautiful ball field. What a great place to play baseball." And it says over there on those stands, Asheville, the playground of America. So to do my rephotograph, it was a little difficult because now they had a big wall there. on the right-hand side. So I'm not in the exact same spot. I felt it was pretty important in terms of the rephotographs of the actual literal ones that I was redoing to try to find the exact location where Pelton had photographed, but the wall did not allow me to do that. Early baseball players in Asheville. These were the Asheville Mountaineers. Professional baseball in Asheville dates to 1897, when the Asheville Moonshiners took the field. I like that name, the Moonshiners. It's been played continuously for nearly every year since then, since 1909, with early teams such as the Redbirds and here the Mountaineers. The Mountaineers played from 1910 to 1914. The tourist name dates from 1915. But the Mountaineers, this was the year they won the pennant of the league, so that's why Pelton made it. Actually, let me stop there for a second. There's something I love about Pelton's attention to detail. Notice the bat boy, he's holding the baseball. You see how he's holding the baseball? Very elegantly. I don't think a kid would think to hold it like that. And then in the background, there are 3 other young children who are squatting down. And I'm sure Pelton said, please get down so you're not in the photograph. So he knew to pay attention to details. Fast forward to 1996, the Asheville Tourist hosted Buck O'Neill, who was a famous star of the Negro Leagues. I think he pitched for the Kansas City Monarchs in town and to celebrate the Negro Leagues. So all the Asheville tourists wore period uniforms from that era. These are not their contemporary uniforms. Good photographs for the World Series going on, yes. Yeah. And this is a sports soccer team at Asheville High some years ago, but I put it in because the coach, something you can do with this old camera is you can run and get in it twice. So he's not twins, it's not twins coach, he's on this side, Bobby Somerville, and on that side. So as soon as the camera has rotated past this part, then the person can either run back behind me, which is usually the case, or behind the group to get in it twice. So. This was the Asheville Fire Department in 1922, and it was an all-volunteer department at that time. And behind it is the City Hall and the police station and the fire station there as well. They're quite dapper, aren't they? I wonder if they really were the firemen. So to redo it, I asked the fire department, and they were happy to do it. And this is the same location where the original fire department panorama was made. And this represents about 1/3 of the time, at the time, about 1/3 of the Asheville Fire Force, firefighters. And I think they'd grown to, at that point, have something like 69 vehicles. But they were aware of Pelton's original panorama and wanted to participate based on that history that they knew. This is an image of Pack Square that I think really goaded me on because I saw it being used and credit was never given to Herbert Pelton. It used to be in the Pack Place, part of it in the entranceway there. And also in the Biltmore building, it was there, and it's just a beautiful image. It shows the streetcars gathering as kind of the focal point of where the streetcars would meet downtown. And the original southwest corner of Pack Square, which is still there, it's the only remaining part of Pack Square that's true to what it was. Then you'll see this white structure. This is where the weather was posted. And the weather service was in the legal building, and you can see just barely the top part of its instruments where it would collect data and put the weather up for people. This would be fine if we had a few of those streetcars left. An earlier incarnation with this pool, and then I went back a couple of weeks ago. Admittedly, this photograph needs to be made in winter when there are no leaves on the trees, to see what it's looking like now. This one, Herbert got on top of the legal building to make this great panorama. It shows how thriving the middle of downtown was in that era. And I don't think anything special was going on that day, but I'm not sure. But notice the light bulbs hanging from Vance Monument. Doug Swain, who worked with Historic Resources, said to me that when they saw this photograph, they reinstituted that tradition of hanging light bulbs from Vance Monument. So it's kind of cool. That's the Langren Hotel, which its bones were standing there 6 or 7 years. So when it was finally finished, the city was happy to be rid of the eyesore. And that's Higginson Studio. I don't think Pelton was in that space with him. But around 1906, this is 1910, I think, Asheville had 16,000 people and more than 100 boarding houses, supporting a very strong tourist economy. But Herbert and Sarah kept their boarding house only for a year, and then they moved on. And that's when he started doing photography with Higginson. And this shot I did on St. Patrick's Day, and there was a parade of antique automobiles going through the square. But Pelton was evidently the only photographer in Asheville. I think this one thing is interesting. It bends the lines of the Biltmore building. It makes it look more attractive. Trivia, what was it first called? Do you remember this building's first name? Very good, the Axona building, yeah. It was a Dutch corporation that had it built, yeah. This is what?
It was designed by IMK.
That's the rumor. We think it was one of his underlings. Yeah. But yes, his firm.
He
That's
came
right.
to speak when it was dedicated.
Oh, did he? Did you hear that?
I did.
Any nuggets that you can share?
He said his vision for Asheville is it should have more people downtown and they should be living there. Very far-sighted.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So, more people downtown in the middle of Pack Square. This is a wonderful image. Pelton was all about being at the right place at the right time. And I read the newspaper. Actually, this is a great blog post. Shout out to Ione Whitlock, the North Carolina collection. She wrote a blog post about this event, about Mr. Herbert Race and Jay McCants arriving in Asheville from Jacksonville, Florida, after breaking a record of getting here in 2.5 days. Yeah. And X marks the spot of the vehicle. It's a Ford that made it here. It would have been a little quicker, but they said the signs were mixed up in South Carolina. Go figure. And it took 3 hours, 3 extra hours to get here. My grandfather was a member of the motor club here at this point, and I've spent a lot of time peeking. He said, "Where is he?" He asked me, but I never found him in this photo. But you see the city hall in the background, and they encouraged the people with automobiles to go out and meet them. I think 20 or 30 drove out to meet them when they arrived in Asheville. And it says reception. Stop that. Mr. Herbert B. Race and Mr. J.E. Katz by Asheville Motor Club. Finish a record-breaking run, Jacksonville, Florida to Asheville, Tennessee, in 2.5 days, September 20. Time, 2.5 days, car indicated by the X.
Was that the end of the race, or did it?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I have to think it was the end, because it was. Because then Mr. Race and Katz went to the city hall and kind of pontificated about how better roads are needed. And so it implied that they were staying, Martin. More contemporary group of Mercedes Gullwings. Back when the Biltmore estate would allow the cars to be parked on the lawn. But they said these are very valuable cars. They said that there was maybe $30 million worth of vehicles there at the time. Yeah, more now. You don't want to park them too close to each other. So, the Asheville Motor Speedway. I'm just curious, how many people here moved here since 1999? Yeah, fair number. Anyway, we used to have a motor speedway. And it was down, it's a long story, but anyway, contentious story. But you could see how popular it was, how many people were in the stands, and they didn't know that the land was going to be sold and developed and had their speedway taken away from them. So they were quite upset. And this was the last weekend of the races. The cars look so funny, they're distorted because the camera's turning in the opposite direction to the motion of the cars. I'd never heard of the Royal Gorge. Has anyone heard of the Royal Gorge? It's close by. This short route between Old Fort at the foot of Blue Ridge Mountains and Asheville runs over the divide and through. Is popular with motorists because it's a sweeping view of the Royal Gorge and surrounding peaks. And this is in color. He would have had this done by a printer, although you can apply color by hand. But Pelton also did a big business in postcards, colorized postcards that would have been made into color at the printing press. And then this is a group who were trying to get better roads, the Southern Appalachian Good Roads Convention. And evidently this was one of the first groups in the South that had it happen, was here in Asheville and Buncombe County. And that's the old city auditorium that they're in front of. Another colored version from Battery Park, which was really the Grand Hotel. I think it was burned down, but until we lost it. And this just shows you a sample, a little sampling to say he did one of the panoramas. Colored postcards, newsworthy events. This is burning of the Emporium Theater, I think.
It was a department store.
Emporium department store, thank you. Obviously attracting a big crowd. And I love this one in terms of what is normal photographs. This is a womanless wedding in 1921, which evidently was a popular thing to do as a fundraiser. You would find. These are all men. Yep. And thus womanless. This is an interesting story. I own this print, and it sat in my hallway for years and never really thought much about it. But it turns out these gentlemen, these are the streetcar conductors, they're all on strike. And it was the first strike in the history of Asheville. And the AAFS and ERE stands for Amalgamated Association of Street and Electric Railway Employees of America. So they went on strike at Central Methodist Church, where this is. They walked out at noon, and they said the cars were on the way to the car barns. This photograph was made on the 28th, 2 days after the strike began. So they were in the thick of it in the strike. The company which owned the railway brought in strikebreakers, or scabs as they were lovingly called, to break the strike. But local populace met that train in numbers and kind of scared them into, they went and checked the hotel. The strikebreakers were never able to get to work. In the end, the governor, Locke Craig, came to Asheville to come mediate the strike. And through mediation, the workers had an increase in pay. At that time in the U.S., a conductor might earn 17 cents an hour in Elmira, New York, or up to 45 cents an hour in Butte, Montana. So the men pointed out the cost of living had risen 40% in the last 7 years, and the wages had only gone up 1.5 cents. So in the end, they agreed to 20 cents per hour for new men and 25 cents for third and later years. So if you were working, an hourly working, that would give you $14 for a 6-day week. And a noon worker would take home $10.50. Do you think people were more serious back then? Or just it was a photograph? And here's another one of my favorites. Both as an image and as a social document of the times. Notice all the workers. This is the tannery, Henry Sons Tannery, which started in 1896 and I think closed their doors in the 1950s. But meeting with Cyclone Mac, who's the man standing left with the white shirt, and he was a celebrity. He was an evangelist who'd come to town for 6 weeks. His name was Baxter McClendon. This is from the newspaper as well. Evangelist known as Cyclone Mac, reputed to be the most powerful evangelistic preacher in America. Today he will open, he's a preacher of the straight gospel, an everlasting champion of right, a bitter enemy of wrong, and a startling figure in the church world today is here for a 6-week series. McClendon was a wicked man, a professional gambler, a drunkard, hunted by police, and leading a miserable life of sin and shame. He was converted in Bennettsville, South Carolina, when Bud Robinson, the cowboy preacher, held a meeting there. Without a doubt, McClendon is a great preacher. He went to Morganton, North Carolina, a church town in the strictest sense of the word, and to a great extent an aristocratic town. He went to Morganton and began his meeting there in the face of opposition, and now the people of that city and other cities near there are now trying to get special trains to Asheville to hear him. Finally, they describe him, but his personal appearance in the pulpit is striking. He's a handsome man, tall, well-built. Okay, let's see. I can't get it back. Tall, well-built, with coal black eyes and a great shock of black hair. He preaches with all the force of his superb body. So where is this? And thanks to a descendant of the manager of Hans Rees John Buckner. He took me out there to show me where the tannery used to be, and this is pretty much the exact spot today. The house, the structure on the left is the same. That's the same house, same structure. Obviously, the wedge building is new. And the railroad tracks are still over here on the right. And another evangelist, Billy Graham, dedicating the freeway here coming into Asheville. And I found it interesting to use this camera for purposes it was not designed for. In other words, when there's action, when there's stuff going on, it gives you a certain serendipity. Sometimes it's just luck. Billy Graham's talking there. Jim Hunt is on the podium, as is Ruth Graham. But then, including beyond the edges, beyond the normal frame of a photograph, I'm fascinated with what else goes on. I love this lady's laughter. Her body language is up like that. And then people on the edges as well. I live in Montford. We live in Montford, and this is a Stumptown reunion that was there. Stumptown was a part of Montford, or on the edge of Montford. And I don't know if they've kept having reunions or not. Do you know, Sharon?
Yeah, they have them periodically.
Good, good.
We were able to identify about 65 of the 72 people in there.
Bravo. Bravo. I'm going to share your technique at the end for identifying people in these groups. So Pelton and Sarah moved into Norwood Park, and this is how it looked early on. I think they were there a little bit later than this. And this is the same vantage point. So after his partnership with Higginson, later he had several other partnerships. One was with George Massa, who many people know of, George Massa. And that happened in 1920. They were partners in what was called the Photocraft Shop on Biltmore Avenue. Later, Massa acquired all the interest in the shop and changed the name to the Plateau Studio. And then Massa sold out to Urball Sr. in 1926. Pelton's mother and sister moved to town and lived with Herbert and Sarah. And not long after that, Pelton was divorced from Sarah in 1924. This is the country club of Asheville, but to make a golf course, they swapped the land with Grove Park County. And so that's where the golf links are in Grove Park County now. So Pelton and Sarah divorced in 1924, and then he remarried within 5 months to Allie Vivian Moore, who was an employee in his studio. That's right, that's what I said. Not good, Herbert. And she was a divorced single parent who'd been working at Pelton Studios for 4 years. He was 44. She was 35. Her 12-year-old son, named Wendell, was one of the witnesses to the marriage on 60 Flint Street. He became the father to Wendell, and Wendell himself eventually became a photographer as well. I was able to track down Wendell's wife at one point. So this is the North Carolina Bar Association of Toxaway, and in the background is the Toxaway Hotel, which is no more. In August, following the Great Flood in Asheville, the Great Flood here was in July, but in August there was a huge flood that wiped out the dam of Lake Toxaway. And no one was killed except for one mule. It was interesting, but the hotel and the lake never recovered. It was the playground of the rich. They had 3 trains a day coming into Toxaway, Lake Toxaway, but it never really recovered from that. And that shows the Toxaway in as well. So Pelton, the last city director mention of him is in 1928. And he moved to Washington, D.C. With Allie. And here is the fire company. But they separated not long after that he arrived. He did operate a photography studio there called the Vogue Studio. And I haven't been able to find any of his photographs from that period. The ads suggested said portraits, commercial, technical, and passports. He operated it until about 1937. And in 1938-9, at the age of 60, that was the last year he was listed as a photographer in the city directory. The only Pelton, you probably can't see it, but a lot of these images are copyrighted. He was very meticulous about that early on. And that's why the Library of Congress has those copyright images. But the only image I could find notice of in Washington, D.C. was called the Baby Bond. No, excuse me, the Bond Baby, which was taken during World War II. Wendell, the son, married in 1934 and lived with his mother in a rooming house. And I was able to call Mary Moore towards the end of his life and quote from her. She said, "Why did Pelton come to D.C.? I don't know. Perhaps it is because of the Depression. At the time, I understand he got a job at a high-class studio there as a photographer, and later Wendell, he could get him a job there as well. Harrison Ewing. Both of these studios have since gone out of business." And she describes their lives in D.C. at the time. I was a teenager when I married Wendell in 1934. Our life was very hard. As with the Depression, we did not have much money. We lived with his mother, Vivian, in a rooming house on 18th Street. She rented rooms to supplement our existence. When Mrs. Moore would go to Pelton's shop, she would bring home small items that Herbert would give her. They never divorced, as they neither had the money for a lawyer, as neither had money for the lawyer. So she used the name of Moore, even up to the day she died. This is another picture up on top of the mountain overlooking Waynesville, Eagle's Nest Cloudland. And as you see why it's called Cloudland, it's socked in with clouds. And those are the tent. I think those are tents. At least one's a tent where if they had overflow guests. Sadness to this when you think of why those children were there, the Indian school, to unlearn their own culture. And we're getting down towards the end here. This is Greystone Camp, the Cherry Blossom Festival. Don't have a date on this, 1920s, I would assume. Talk about an orchestrated photograph. And this is what the camp looks like today. A lot of campers. So, Sharon, this is what I do if people want to be identified in a photograph. You give them all a card with a number, and they write their names on the back of the card. And then after the photograph, you have a record of who was where. So, lastly, Pelton was listed as the owner of a coffee shop in Washington, D.C. That was a household used goods store, and also as an inserter for the Times Herald newspaper. His residence was in the basement of the shop. And whatever became of his negatives, we have no idea. I would love to know. My hunch is when he sold his studio here in town, he would have left those, because the market was here. Not in Washington, D.C. But like a number of other famous photographers, he was not famous, but like Eugene Auger, Anthony Brady, they died pretty much broke. Lewis Hine as well, Carlton Watkins. And in 1956, in Thanksgiving 1956, Pelton was committed to St. Elizabeth's Mental Hospital, where he spent the last 4.5 years of his life. He died of a heart attack in 1961 at the age of 81. His brother, Walter Pelton, signed his death certificate, and his remains were cremated at the Leeds funeral. And that, my friends, is some of the story about Herbert Pelton. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Yes?
I've got three.
I'll repeat them. Give me one at a time.
Well, yes, but you know where George Masson also used panoramic cameras.
Do I know whether George Massa always also used panoramic cameras? I'm not familiar with him ever doing that. I've never seen any panoramas that had his credit line on it.
I have neither. The second, I recall a postcard taken by Pelton, and I think it was Conrad, up around the Craggy, a picture of the Craggies, maybe around 1911. I wonder if he mentored George Massa on some of the Western North Carolina locations.
I think he actually taught George Massa some photography. Yeah, that's I forget where in my research I found it, but I think they were close, they were friends, and actually he taught them. So could be likely that he did show him some of those views.
The final question is, there was his last name is Tanner, who did colorized postcards. He lived in Rutherfordton and with some of George Massa's photographs of Magnolia Gardens. He had these colorized, I think, in Switzerland. Have you ever heard of him?
No, I haven't, but we have some postcard aficionados in the group who might have.
He did a bunch of them. He did a bunch of them, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
What kind of negatives did he produce with that camera?
That's a great question. Thank you, because I meant to show you. The film would come in a box, and it's on a spool. This is an 8-inch circuit. The circuit's as small as a number 5 up to a number 16.
Could we turn on the light so we can see a little bit?
Yeah. Liz, the lights are back in the corner. But they're complex. I tried to turn them on and they weren't.
Other way.
There you go.
So the film is in a spool, and it's, can you hold this one? Oh, no. I can't use this film. That's right. So this is the backing paper. And this is film, unexposed, old out-of-date film. And it could be 6 feet long. And so your prints are a contact print. They're not enlarged, they're very beautiful. That's why the panoramas look very luscious. A couple samples back here for us. And don't forget those beautiful antique catalogs. So you could get a couple panoramas, or you could do a 360, just, it's up to you. So everything is larger, your darkroom has to be larger, I have big trays for making the prints, et cetera, et cetera. So
Did he buy those commercially? Were they custom made or?
originally Kodak made, Kodak circuit film. You could buy that up to maybe 20 years ago, I'm not sure, but Kodak quit making it. And then Ilford started selling their aerial film, because they used to have these big old cameras, pre-digital. They had these long spools of film in the camera, in the airplanes. And so I would buy 250-foot rolls of the film, and then have to spool that in the dark to manageable length. And I think you guys still have some frozen. I think Ilford, you can still get that film from Ilford.
They'll make custom runs of film every so often, people order them.
Right, yeah, custom run, yes.
Is there a timer or a mechanism so that it stays at a specific pace for even exposure?
It's a wind-up, like a wind-up plot motor. And there's a gear on the bottom of it. And I'm not sure if this is going to turn because I forgot the key to wind it up. Oh, here we go. It's just going to go a little bit.
And that's
This
mounted
is-
so it's the nodal point of the lens?
Yes. Yeah, so that's
So you just use one lens, or do you have to do it?
one
for
lens.
different lenses?
And it's a continuous exposure. The film is back here in the back. It's a spool getting pulled across at the same time. So it's a continuous exposure. But the lens is actually a triple convertible lens, where you could take off one element and make it more like telephoto, take off another element and make it even a larger telephoto.
Did you have to move it to account for the
Yes.
change in?
Yeah, you should come up and look afterwards. There are 3 different scales that you would use like that.
You mentioned that the film moves by a slit.
Yes, the film moves by a slip in the back. Thank you. Are you a circuit user? Have you used one of these cameras?
I worked making long color transparencies.
You hold this so you can get
When I was going to school in at Art Center College of Design in Los Angeles in the early 1960s, at night I had a job making what were called walk-alongs that went behind holiday or ice. So when the dancers were all and skating and whatnot, there was a background that moved along behind. These walk-alongs were artwork that were put inside a big circle about 8 feet in diameter. And then we had a custom-built circuit camera that was inside that and moved around and took that. And then I developed that film on big reels about this big around. They were 5-inch film. And that's how I know about that.
All right, so you're meeting an old friend here. This is good. Yeah, the camera's probably about 100 years old. And today I use a digital camera. It's rare that I use it. And the digital camera just rotates, and we stitch the digital images in Photoshop.
Now, is there some reason why the photos from the Library of Congress, if you don't use Photoshop to stitch them together and get rid of that line? I'm just curious why
Yeah,
you do that.
I could have, if I'd taken the time.
Yeah,
But them, that's a good question, why they have that online like that. I'm not sure about it.
Probably easier to scan. Nobody has to do anything, just
Yeah.
have that.
Yeah. But I doubt they have the negatives. I think they just have those prints and they scan it. Yeah, do it.
Oh, flat.
Yeah, when they scan it.
Oh.
Yeah.
And they probably have
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for coming out.